to thank very sincerely the support of our faculty, of the faculty of LSH, who has they have helped us financially. The laboratory, or LPS, has also they support us, and some people also from Maison de la Recherche who have logistically helped us, and Thibaud, mainly because it hasn't been very easy to organize all this during the summertime. Well, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. Also, I must say very few words that are very similar. I would say it seemed like we have been writing this together this morning. First of all, of course, thanks to Raquel and also to Themis. When we decided to organize, to have this is the third summer school, we decided 1 year ago that despite the difficulties in making the institutional connection more evident, it would absolutely make sense to have the third summer school here. Then, of course, thanks to Thibaud for the support during the summer. Actually, I have to say, I almost obliged him. We met in Brest, and I say, okay, now you sit here, and you help Raquel for the final effort in order to really create such an amazing program, I would say. So really, thank you, and of course, thanks to the institution that is hosting us and also providing, why not to mention, economical support, because we are always trying to bring research forward, and this is not an easy time to organize this kind of things, because also in our field we see more and more closure and more difficulties to establish international connection. So really, I would like to thank you once again for this precious opportunity. Again, many reasons for being here. I would just like to mention 3 of them. This is the third summer school, so we are almost concluding the first cycle of the international joint program of social representation, culture, and communication. It has been a learning process, I would say. We have been, our goal, if you remember, when we 4 years ago started to re-establish the program, even more than 4 years ago, was to re-establish this as a space for interdisciplinary training on social representation, culture, communication. So with the idea of taking the roots of social representation theory and try to work on relevant issue, sensitive issue, contemporary issue, and we will see with your presentation about the different topics that you have been working on, but also with the idea of working on the theory, so not just applying a theory as a tool and make a description of an infinite number of objects, social representation of the famous problem that we have, but rather to try to identify bridges, connection with other discipline that sometimes I believe has more to do with 19th century, that this distinction between what is sociology, what is communication, what is psychology, what is geography, and sometimes, or political science. So we are trying to establish these theoretical bridges. And it's not the case that after the Brest conference, we are also here once again in France, and it's a way also to recognize, as I was saying, the theoretical roots. The idea that, and as Raquel said, here we had several generations that have been trained, that have developed their own perspective on the social construction of reality, I would say, broadly speaking. And without this root, also without the methodological and theoretical development that have been created, also especially in Aix-en-Provence, we can't really bring the theory forward to the contemporary world, where everything has changed in terms of communication, in terms of interpersonal relationship, but still we need to move from what has already been developed. So the second reason is, of course, this. Raquel mentioned again, and I want to stress, the institutional relationship. It's a way for us also to, re-establish, to work together to give again, I would say, a full institutional recognition to the connection with Aix-en-Provence, maybe also with Lyon. So the idea that the joint program has been developing, now we are looking forward to develop the next, let's say, 3 or 4 years of institutional agreement. So it's important to also take this opportunity to see what can be concretely done beyond the intention, how to overcome the bureaucratic problems that sometimes stop us. And last point that I just want to quickly mention is for our student, as you already say, the opportunity to meet with other colleagues working more or less in the same direction and see what kind of connection can be established for, say, their own research, for imagining, and now thinking especially to students who are almost finishing or maybe in the next year, also to establish, why not, international collaboration, international projects, looking towards, I don't know, a Marie Curie project or things like this. It's important to take this opportunity also to see who else is working in similar fields, what we can do together. The idea that we are doing research alone, it's, in my opinion, totally false. It's a myth that actually impede to develop proper research and good research. So the third reason is really a space for training in an open and collaborative setting, also listening to key scholar, top scholar. Now I don't want to read the entire program, you have it. Top scholar in our field who can provide suggestion, feedback, ideas to improve our own perspective. A special emphasis has been given, I think, also to methodology, not only because we are here, that's where some of the method and the techniques have been developed, but also to answer to a specific request from the, let's say, almost second-year student who were actually asking for more method. So that's also something that, once again, I want to thank you, has been recognized, and we hope you will find during these few days. It took too much time, so there will be many other reasons, and I mean, we can discuss during the next days and taking all the opportunities. So thank you again.
Thank you. And now we'll start talking with Thibaud.
Fabien.
And Fabien. Now we'll present to you a little bit more of our lab. So to start with, I'd like to present the head of our lab, that's Fabien Girandola. He'll say a few words about what we're doing, what are the key lines of research of our lab that's not only about social representation. So he'll talk to you a little bit about that.
Thank you, Raquel. Thank you, Thibaud, and all the organization. So I would like to. Okay. I would like to welcome all of you for this semester. And yes, as you said, Raquel, I'm director of the Laboratory of Social Psychology, and I'm going to introduce this by the historical point of view of the laboratory. Historically, we have two main theories in our laboratory since 1960, 1970. We have the main themes, social representation. That's why you are here, okay? Social representation. We learn about context, social cognitive processes, emotion, and ideological functioning. These are the main subjects of our laboratory. And as I said, it means that 50 years of research about this. It's huge. The second main subject is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance and commitment. This is a main topic because when we talk about cognitive dissonance, when we talk about commitment, we talk about attitude change. We talk about behavior change. And attitude change, behavior change are in connection with social representation. So the second topic, dissonance, cognitive dissonance, commitment, has been introduced in the laboratory a bit later, in 1986, 1990, by Robert Vincent Joule, who has worked a lot on this theory. And his students, as I am, have worked around this theory. So, main topic in our laboratory with a methodological approaches, mixed methodologies, qualitative, quantitative, and of course, experimental design. So, second, a little more details about cognitive dissonance. I'm not working on social representation, so I won't talk about social representation. I will talk about cognitive dissonance, but for a brief, very brief, short presentation. So, what do we do when we talk about cognitive dissonance? We talk about commitment, because commitment is for us necessary for cognitive dissonance to appear. Commitment in a behavior. When you make something that is inconsistent with your thought, with your ideas, you are going to improve, you're going to feel some cognitive dissonance. Okay, so we need to be committed before to feel some dissonance. So, commitment and dissonance are necessary together. So, we have worked on the 3D consented submission. So, I put a book here from Beauvoir and Joule, Jean-Léon Beauvoir and Robert Vincent Joule, who has written this book. You have also, I don't know if you know, Petit traité de manipulation à l'usage des honnêtes gens, which is a very famous book in France, which has been a very, very known book, which shows different techniques of behavior change. And of course, other books. So, under dissonance and social cognitive processes, we talk about rationalization. Rationalization is when you think that you could change your ideas, your behavior. You make something that you don't like, so you are going to improve dissonance. And this dissonance is going to change your attitudes, your behavior. So you are going to like what you are going to do, or what you have been done. So, very different field of research: vicarious dissonance, expressive dissonance, emotional dissonance, and selective exposure to information. These are the field of research that in our laboratory we explore. And we have, of course, multi-lab replication in induced submission, induced compliance, which are the main field of research in cognitive dissonance. So I would like, of course, to go further, but maybe another communication. So we have different books, of course, about cognitive dissonance, written by Beauvoir, Joule, Radical Dissonance Theory, and this one in French, 2014, 11 years ago now. But it puts all the French and American point of view of cognitive dissonance. So the last slide is to show that okay, there are two main topics, but these main topics we we try to make them work together. So we have a link. We have a link between the social representation and the commitment theory. And in this book called Représentation sociale, we have written a chapter. It's not the only chapter, but it's an example of a chapter about the link between commitment and social representation. So the idea is that when somebody is committed, maybe it could change our social representation of the two. And that's very important. It's a way of changing the representation, the social representation. And so we have our article. Here we show that with social representation and commitment technique, we show that social representation could have an impact, could have an aim on technique, on behavioral techniques here in environment. So Matteo Monaco, which will be here tomorrow, and myself have written in environment and behavior one article about this. This is a bit hard, 10 years, but we have some. It's going to be finished soon. So I think I have made the presentation about 3 slides, and I would like to thank you for having the opportunity to talk here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fabien. So as you see, the LPS does not do only research on social representations, and Fabien is a very good reminder of that. Now, me and Thibaud, we'd like to start exploring and going more clearly into our key subject, social representations, but we'll do this in tandem. So we'd like to propose to you an exploration of 2 issues. So I'm talking about one of my research, and Thibaud will do another exploration of a research study on health issues, and I'm working on environmental issues. But more than that, I would like to invite you to approach these objects in a slightly different way. So I'll take advantage of what Mauro said before. We're not doing, and this is mainly what I'd like you to pay attention to. If sometimes we have done research of social representations of X, Y, Z, we're doing more today here at the LPS. We're doing more research of an effort towards theorization and towards the deconstruction of these social objects. So this presentation I'm doing with Thibaud will try to show you how we're doing this. Okay, so I'll try to show you in one of the studies more of a longitudinal and how could we explain social change through which methods. Okay, so I'll present you this, and Thibaud will do a sort of a deconstruction of a theoretical, not a theoretical, but a social object. So, but just to rewind and to connect also with the idea of LPS and why are we here today, I'd like because very often when we think of the Laboratoire d'Aix-en-Provence, we think, or maybe we have a central core of this representation that is the structural approach. I'm sure you've already heard of this, and I'd like to remind you some key names of people who have been involved with this research. You have maybe already seen these names around. I went to take a look at the history of our lab as well. It was founded in '64. It has been a while, by Claude Flamand, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So Claude Flamand, and then also Jean-Claude Abric has been also one of the directors. Guimeli also is another name that you've already heard. So these are people who have contributed to this theory and to this approach in particular. So when we talk about this approach, and these are two names that Fabien has mentioned before. Patrick Rateau, he'll talk to you. Grégory Le Monaco, and also Anthony. These are people who have been contributing still today to this approach. Okay, the people who are these people here, they're not active today, but these guys, you can contact them. Okay. So when we talk about the structural approach, the key idea that you have and the key research questions that we ask is what is the central core of the representations, and also how this central core is related to a social representation, isn't it? How can we describe through which methods? How do we arrive there? Which are the elements that constitute it? How do these elements change? How they resist change? And in this sense, what is the periphery of this social representation? So all these elements, they are discussed, described through this approach. Well, this has been a long theoretical development from Aix-en-Provence, specifically methodological as well. Because at that time, we were very interested in developing also software and mathematical approach that could talk about this. But today, these things have largely evolved without going to why and how. It is a fact. We'll talk about social change. I've talked to you about social change, and institutions and laboratories change a lot. And LPS, our lab, has also changed a little bit more, has evolved from this vision of social representations. And I'd like to talk to you about some changes through researchers, through the people who constitute this lab. And one of the people who has largely contributed to this, to enrich also how we see social representations, has been Themis Apostolidis and Lionel Denis. They're not here in these 3 days, but they have done a lot of research on health research, and this is associated with a master's that exists here today, and that has been also a historical that has formed lots of people and lots of research lots of researchers that's a master in health psychology. So these two, Themis and Lionel, they have added these qualitative approaches. They have they have done lots of contributions on that, and questioning research practices and health practices, professionals. Marc Souville has also contributed a lot to this aspect, professionals. And today we can see and we can state that more than these methodological approaches around the central core, the LPS can be today characterized by a research and a theoretical and methodological plurality, a complexity that goes in the sense of what? Of a triangulation. So today, and I can say this to you as somebody that has not done the PhD here, me and Thibaud, we do not come from this lab, and I think we're very well placed to recognize the important place it holds in the structural approach, but more than that, in a methodological complexity. Okay, and this contextualization of how do we do research on social representations we have seen, and it is done still today on around and in health practices, work and organizations, and our colleague Marc Souville, Christophe Demarque, Marina Burakova. So these are colleagues who can, I told you in the beginning, and I insist, if you do have research around these topics, don't hesitate in contacting these people. They're around here. You can even knock on their doors, okay? So take advantage of your stay. Maybe you can also ask for funding to come here, stay a semester. It's up to you. You know, you can do this easily with Erasmus, happily. So I'm doing research, Christophe Demarque and Bouchra Zouri, around environmental issues. And gender studies it's also a topic that's been explored by our colleagues. Léa Lelorin, Solveig Lelorin, Léa Restivo. Well, so this is about our lab. And I'd like to take another step towards this vision of social representations that I was talking to you about. I'm really keen in looking at social representations as a theory of social change. And for that, I inspired myself of this article that I think some of you may be familiar with, where Bauer and Gaskill, they make this distinction between a strong version of social representations and a weak version of social representations. And this echoes a lot what Mauro was saying before. First, this weak version would be the studies of social representations of something. Well, just without any further reflection, just ask the question and then come up with an answer. Well, what we try to do here, and what I'm trying to show you as a research example, is something that is more towards the description of social change. So here we're talking about the analysis of how social thought evolves, and social representations will be the study of this, of the conflicts that arise with with these changes, and how these changes also bring about social conflict. Okay, so these two things that are together, I'll try to make you an example of this through. This is where, this is I'm just citing some examples of this. So the analysis of the evolution of the representation of social change, the comparison across social groups with different social status. I'll talk to you a lot, and I talk a lot about climate change as a pretty good example because it faces us with the need for change. And often people will just talk about climate change. Well, how do we think about climate change? But actually climate change urges us to change. So this is a pretty good example of and a case to analyze social representations, because our institutions need also to adapt and to think about things about our environment and even about our role in a different manner. And very often we have to also ask ourselves, are we living the life that we could be living? And will our life be possible in the same way that it is today in a decade or some decades after today? So this is the type of questions that climate change faces us with. So this is why I'm really interested in talking about environmental change and social representations. And another thing that I'd like you to keep in your mind for this presentation and for the whole summer school is what are the possible triggers for social change. Here I put social, environmental, but anyway, for social change, what brings about social change? Is it changes that are brought up by crisis? It could be an epidemic, as we've seen. COVID has sparked and has pushed lots of changes in work-situated relations, for example. The evolution of customs, of social habits, and of course, laws and regulations. We've seen, for example, very important examples in different countries, and even in a decade, where, do you remember when homosexual marriage was made possible in some countries? It's something that's quite recent. But before that, we didn't see this and we didn't regard these relations the same way. So it's as if from a law, from a regulation, we started seeing intergroup relations in a different way. So it's very interesting to see regulations and laws also as something that can bring about social change. Not only something that is the key objective of social change, but something that can make it and can accelerate it. So I'm talking to you about, and this is another thing that interests me a lot, is how are these implicitly shared expectations something that can change our behaviors and our social representations mainly, okay? So this is why I'm pretty confident that this question of, I put you here this way, so laws and regulations, of course, they make changes, or they trigger and they accelerate changes in our widely shared cultural, our shared social expectations, implicit social expectations, otherly said, our social norms, because what we implicitly expect from other people's behaviors, we can say that these are social norms, right? And I make the connection with what Fabien was telling you before, what we expect from other people and what's expected from us in a social setting, for example. This is what I'm talking to you about. And if it's regulated and if it's a law, even more. So all of this can sometimes direct or can frame social representations. Okay? So this is the type of question that I ask and that I'll put here as an example of research. This is an article where I presented with Paula Castro an idea for this. How can we diagnose social change? Diagnose in quotations, because this is something that we can never diagnose, we can observe. But these social changes, they can be very subtle in the interpersonal relations. And we can sometimes compare a country with another if we pay attention to these implicitly shared expectations that are social norms. Okay, so this is the study I'm talking to you about. It is you see this picture. This was a storm that hit France in 2010. What is special about this storm? Maybe the French colleagues they remember this one, Cynthia. This was a storm that made 58 victims, but more than that, it was a very important one because it was the first time in France that we had casualties related to a sea storm. So this was what we would say this in English, this was a coastal flood that ended up, there was a whole city that was flooded for 3 days, and we had all these casualties. But so this was the first time that this kind of hurricane touched France, and it was a sign of climate change. So this is why it was important. It had never been observed, this type and this strength of a storm. And this is why I was so interested in this. The second reason why it was interesting is because, in France we call this submersion marine, this kind of event. And it's a legal definition for this, submersion marine. But if we ask people in the street or people who are touched by this kind of floods, how they think, and is our submersion marine something that concerns you? What is submersion marine? What I mean is that submersion marine, or the way we're naming this kind of event, is not something that makes sense for them. This is a legal category. It's not something that it's put on their words and in their meaning. Okay, I'll just give you an example. So when we, because this is the term, the technical term, and the term that the people who work in a assurance, comment on dit? Insurance. And insurance companies, they call this submersion marine. And me and another colleague, when we started working with this with geographers, we thought that the name was a little bit bizarre and that people wouldn't understand. So we put the question to research, to students in one of our university campuses, and we asked them the simple question that structural approach normally we would ask: what comes to your mind when you think of submersion marine? And you can imagine what they say, maybe, because it's submersion marine in French. What they said mainly was going underwater, but like in scuba diving. So submersion marine, poisson. So they talked about fish, about sea life, about this kind of stuff. And what does this talk to you? This made us think about this subject. Is that we had to better describe what submersion marine meant and how it was used in the media and in the legal sphere and in the media, and kind of sort of retrace the usage of this term. So this was something very important for us. And we also wanted to know how this storm, Cynthia, that was a fatal one for 58 people, and that was something that hit the spirits of people, how this storm changed the way we talk about this type of events. Have we started, has the media and the journalists started talking more about marine submersion at that point or not? So we wanted just to retrace this and tell the story of this submersion marine. So we wanted to describe with this study how and when did a representation of submersion marine was observed in the media. When did it become a social issue? And how did this issue mobilize the public debate just after the storm hit? And finally, during the application, because when this storm hit, well, first there is this phase of management, what we're doing, etc. But then there was a moment where policymakers started figuring out what are we going to do in the future when these things start happening again? Because it will. It was the first, but it's not the last. And for sure, this will get worse. So there was a moment where policymakers started to figure out how the state was going to manage this. And so we wanted to see how during this second phase, media talked about it. So for this, what I'll show you is personality, something that you've seen, I'm sure, for in other studies in social presentations. But here I wanted to compare 1, 2, and 3 types of explanation that we could do for what happened and how the story was told. So the first paradigm that we wanted to use to explain this was the social change paradigm that's proposed by Paulo Castro. And it's a paradigm that explains social change social change related to environment through 3 phases. So how is the time?
The time is good.
Okay. So these 3 phases that this paradigm presents are first, and a social issue emerges. So here we have the emergence phase, and it emerges often through scientific debate. So let's say scientists, they have found that something is happening, blah, blah, blah. So here we will be talking about about scientists and climate change, for example. So there's the emergence of an issue. Then, secondly, we would see the institutionalization of this issue. So this will be what? It's the laws and regulations, but also the institutions, ministries, and all you can think of. For example, the COVID was a pretty good example, where first was the emergence, everybody was panicking, and a second moment, do you remember here in France we had maybe even the application where we had an app that we had to use to scan to go through, and the laws that were passed in urgency. All this is the institutionalization of this issue. Okay, so the second phase, the institutionalization, it becomes law, and the third issue, the third time for the social change is the generalization. And in this phase, we'll see that intergroup relations and interpersonal relations start to be something that's heating up. So people start not agreeing with this, they start to fight against it, they get in conflict, they resist. Okay? So regarding climate change, the third phase would be the phase where people whose main interests are attacked, they will not be happy about it and they will protest. Okay, so we'll see these three phases later on. This was the first theoretical frame. The second one, I'm not going too much of a detail, but it's a framework that I really, really like. And it's a very useful one to explain social change related to media analysis, which is the social amplification of risk framework. So this framework, it often it explains how an issue is lightened up. Well, so sometimes we have issues that, even if they exist, it's not because they exist and there is people, for example, in health research, people that are dying sometimes of some things, but it's sometimes because you don't have the right tools to identify them, we don't see them, and they are attenuated. So for this framework, the moment where we bring about and we discover something that's killing people, and so the public concern goes up, and then people start to pay attention to it, and then suddenly it becomes an issue. But the fact that it becomes an issue is the social amplification of risk. So a very good example of this social amplification of risk is the 2003 heat wave in Paris. I think it's a very good case, because before 2003, we did have heat waves in France, but we didn't have the tools or didn't have the semantics to name what was happening and to see that it was killing people. There was something that was really, really dangerous. From 2003 on, we started to pay attention. We had indexes. We had all the state had already brought up tools to manage this type of crisis, and it wasn't the case before. So this is for the social amplification of risk framework, and then this study, I used it as an example of something that I could explain why marine submersion became an issue just after the storm. So this is why I put it there. This is the second. And the third is just a sort of a control type of framework, because this framework is a very useful one also for those of you who do media analysis. This downs media or issue attention cycle. It shows us more or less the cycles that media goes through when there is a new big issue that arises. It's the classical stuff. If you Google something, or if you do an analysis with media, you'll see very often just after a crisis there is a spike and the interest, and then it slowly fades away. And there is a pre-problem phase, a spike when we discover, and then there is a plateau sometimes. And then afterwards, we mention this type of stuff in retrospect. So this is the COVID situation, very classical one. Today we'll talk about COVID, but not about something that's happening here, but in retrospect. We say, well, pre-COVID, or this is during COVID years. So we use this as a temporal marker. Very useful for those of you who do media studies as a temporal marker of years, etc. So this is the three main ideas that I wanted to show you, and the method, well, it was a classical one. We use a platform that I don't know if it exists today. We have another one in our university, but it was Factiva. We used 8 journals for this study. 8 journals, why? Because we wanted a key journals in the national level and then the regional level. Why this difference? There is another very good explanation for this, because the debate around laws and regulations is not at all the same at the national level or at the local level. At the national level, we'll talk about laws and regulations in a way more detached way and closer to the power relations, etc. It's more, it's smoother. Okay, we have a more uniform discourse. And when we see articles that are regional, we see that there are the key stakeholders and key groups that come to the fore. And these are platforms where people express themselves and their disagreements with laws and regulations. So this is why we had this national and regional separation. And we had, of course, why? We go with pairs because there is always some journals that are left wing or right wing. Okay, so we see this at the national level and regional level, and in the regional level we also had the Atlantic coast of France and the Mediterranean coast. So we compared all of this, and this is what's framing our media analysis in the IRAMUTEC software. So the keywords you're seeing here, submersion, marine submersion, etc. The years, we were since 2009 until 2018, so it was a huge amount of articles that we came across. How are we going to read it? You can imagine, how are you going to read more than 3,000 articles? Well, we had 3,300, more or less. So we did a sampling. You know that this is something we are pretty much allowed to do. We can do a sampling of our articles. You can put all the 3,000 in IRAMUTEC. Yes, you could do that. But if we're doing a content analysis, for example, this is what we wanted to do, we have to select some of those. So you can take out the third, or you can select some days of the week to take, for example. So this is more or less the idea, the distribution of the frequencies of publication of articles altogether, the 3,000, from 2005 to 2018. Okay, so what we see here, so here are the time frames that I talked about. It's not very visible, I'm sorry, but here we have the storm that hit. Here we have the trial, because the responsible people were put into trial, and we wanted to see who was responsible, legally speaking, for what happened. And finally, we had the institutional frames and the new laws that propose to manage and to manage this type of situation in coastal regions. So what do we what do you see here? So we see that first, before the storm, there was really not much that was talked about in marine submersion. Just after the storm, there was something that was talked about, but not much. You know, we talked about marine submersion, but it was not something like we could expect in this media attention cycle where we have the spike. No, we didn't see this here. Where we see the big spike was where there was a plan to manage this type of situation. That is where interpersonal relations and intergroup relations became an issue. That is where people started to not be very happy about what was being done. Okay, so this is why, just to go more quickly towards what do I mean with this. So here we have our social change paradigm explanation, or the theoretical frame for this. We would have here in the pre-problem phase, or in this first period where the issue of climate change or marine submersion was only a theoretical one, we have the emergence of the issue, and then on the second phase after the storm hit, we had the institutionalization, because then institutions, they had a pretty good case to say, well, we have to do something about this. We cannot continue in a situation of people can die about these coastal floods. So we have the institutionalization, and then when people started to really feel the results of this new regulation, we have the generalization. And why is it that this last phase people start to not be very happy about it? It's because these new laws, they establish that people cannot build here and here and here, and they have to demolish their houses there by the sea here and there. And you can imagine that lots of people lost a lot of money with this story, right? If you have a very good and great villa in the seafront, maybe you're going to lose it after. And so this is why this was a problem at this phase. Okay, so here I'll just show you briefly the second study based on that, because we use these three phases as variables for the Ramutech software. So I told you about the distinction we made between national and regional media, between the two coasts, Atlantic and the Mediterranean coast. And we also made a difference between the three periods, the three time frames that I've just shown you. So the pre-problem, the emergence, the second one, the institutionalization, and the third one, the generalization. We went on. Are you familiar with the Ramutech? Normally, yes. Don't need to explain this to you in particular. So we put into analysis the variables that I just mentioned. So the time period, the type of newspaper, national or regional, and the geographical, the coast, Atlantic versus English Canal, Mediterranean, and France altogether. Okay? So these were the three variables. And just to go quickly, before I pass the floor to Thibaud, what did we find here? So the key difference, because I really like to see this dendrogram thing, if we understand that this is a key-square relationship, so it's an opposition between a type of discourse and another. The first discourse that emerges, the first distinction that emerges is a distinction between before Xynthia and after Xynthia. So before and after the storm. So before the storm, what did we see? We saw that before this hurricane, there is mainly a national discourse that's presented, that's organized in this axe. So we have a discourse type that will talk about the coastal impacts of climate change. So this is the type of discourse that will say, well, these guys, the scientists, they are talking about the fact that in the future we'll have a lot more droughts, and more heat waves, and more coastal floods. So this is where we've seen this kind of discourse. This was before the storm. And then there was another type of discourse. There was a discourse that talks about marine submerged or coastal floods as events. So this is the type of article that was talking about this weekend in this city. There was an event that caused X zeros in losses, blah, blah, blah. So this is another discourse that emerged. And then after the storm, what we found is a more regional discourse. And in this regional discourse, what we see is mainly the institutionalized language. So here we'll see, for example, the establishment of national risk management plans, this kind of blah blah that comes from the geographic and environmental management kind of discourse. And then finally, the discourse that shows us that people were not in agreement with this loss. This is the type of discourse that we'll talk about, the local conflicts and the public debate, that people are not in agreement with it. They don't want this new laws here because it doesn't apply here. What are we doing? Blah, blah, blah. So this was our main results before the storm and after the storm. And then we wanted to see also another thing that was very interesting to see is who is being used as a source for this media, for these articles. And here you see that before the storm, we had mainly scientists that were mentioned. Here we have scientists, and here we have local politicians. So you see that the discourse comes from a scientific sphere or a scientific place of power and it passes through national politicians, and here you have national politicians that have been very important sources in the beginning to steer the change. You have associations, you have local inhabitants that are here, but this is something that comes about or is shown and presented in the media afterwards. So we have this passage from something or a scientific discourse to a more institutionalized and local discourse, from top to bottom. Well, so to wrap up, what we've seen with these studies, first is that these new ideas, they emerge, they become institutionalized, and then, only then, they will start to impact interpersonal intergroup relations. And this is why I think that this social change paradigm is so useful to analyze social change. And secondly, and this is something that it's always in the back of my mind when we're analyzing risk, is how risks, they can trigger change, and they call us for something that was not there before. So this is what the social amplification of risk paradigm learns. It teaches us this. Sorry. And finally, for me, the key take-home message for this is that this study, and if you do media studies, I really invite you to look at them as evolving debate and to find temporal landmarks that will explain how this discourse changes in time. So this variable of time, which year and which time frame, is really paramount to explain the evolution of this debate. That here was an evolution from a technical scientific discourse, and it became later on a legal and finally a social type of discourse. So that's it, and this study has been published with Solveig Le Lorrain, who's also a colleague here today. It's been published in environmental communication. Thank you. I'll leave you, Thibaud.
Thank you, Raquel. And yes, I will continue this presentation. Yes, as Raquel said in the introduction, our goal was to address transversal issues within the field of social representations. And for this part of this communication, I would like to consider some issues related to the conceptualization of objects that involve phenomena of health and illness, practices, experiences, interactions, meanings, through the theoretical lens of social representations. More specifically, I would like to discuss a set of issues and perspectives concerning the construction of our research objects in specific contexts, conducting fieldwork within health professionals, with professionals, interventions in public health issues that carry normative expectations. In other words, the tensions that may emerge in institutional and medical contexts when the perspective of social representations encounters a biomedical framework. This reflection will be mainly informed by my own research practice. In particular, a recent study has been conducted last year with Themis Apostolidis, but these reflections are also informed by many exchanges I have the opportunity to get in my time in this laboratory. The issue I want to focus on leads us to revisit some classic concerns in psychosocial health research. The way in which our objects of study are already named, defined, segmented by an other. Health institutions, public health policies, health professionals, and how this situation raises crucial ethical, methodological, and epistemological challenges for psychosocial research. To put this reflection in context, I would like to go back over a few points regarding the notion of research object in the field of social representations. Some considerations that I do not intend to be neither exhaustive nor restrictive. Since Moscovici's initial work, classic works in the field of social representations have developed some widely accepted criteria in the theoretical reflection of what constitutes an object of social representations. For instance, we might think back to Jodelet's thoughts: there is no representation without an object. The object cannot be considered independently of the individual and collective subjects who shape it. But the nature of the object is also shaped by the researcher's perspective on social representations. A good example is given by Apostolidis and Kalampalikis, who discuss important features of object selection within the sociogenetic approach or the anthropological approach of social representations. The researcher's orientation toward a particular type of object as target of representations: situated, holistic, complex, systematic objects. And if I may, let's continue this issue about health and illness and the challenge of looking at the subjective and social realities of illness through the lens of social representations. In the field of social representations, many empirical studies have explored the ways in which social groups interact with and respond to illness. Following Herzlich's work, we can observe the diversity of contexts in which phenomena related to illness have been studied, sometimes focusing on specific disease, mental illness, AIDS, cancer, diabetes, and specific psychosocial dynamics and research questions. The objective is obviously not here to present full range of these research questions. Rather, we found interesting enough to highlight some recurring patterns in the way phenomena related to illness are addressed from the perspective of social representation. This body of research has shown that representations of a disease express a form of relationship between the individual and the social. Studying them gives us insight into people's social belonging and the social norms that influence how they cope to their illness and so on. This This approach also emphasizes the everyday understandings of disease, how they are rooted in social life, showing how cultural resources, such as beliefs, values, and practices, are drawn upon to make sense of illness. Another recurring concern is a critique of the strict rational-irrational divide often applied to beliefs about health and disease. Research in social representations highlights that what might appear irrational from a purely cognitive or biomedical perspective often makes sense within the social and cultural contexts of people's everyday lives. But when we think about the theoretical construction of the object from a social representation perspective, it is not simply a matter of following theoretical principles. Rather, it confronts us with underlying scientific and theoretical norms that shape what is considered legitimate knowledge. We can think about social cognitions, its widespread models in health psychology, which can be a challenge for social psychologists to think about phenomena related to illness with the lens of social representations theory. This is a fascinating topic, and it has already been explored by others. What I would like to do, however, is to consider together another normative and epistemological issue: the challenges and implication of applying the social representation perspective to medical settings. These issues become even more pronounced, important to address in specific contexts of research, field and participatory research involving a medical counterpart, public health issues to which the social psychologist may be called upon. In this context, the phenomena that the researcher studies are often framed by or associated with normative expectations. Improving patients' adherence to a treatment, finding ways to better educate patients perceived as insufficiently competent in managing their chronic illness, delivering health information without alarming patients about the nature of their disease. But as we can see, this normativity isn't just about the expectations the healthcare professionals might have for the social psychologist. It also concerns the way phenomena related to illness are labeled and categorized. As we would see, medical categories may emphasize individual responsibility or promote a particular vision of the patient or group in relation to health, the body, illness. This is a task for which theoretical approach of social representations in dialogue with social sciences can provide valuable guidance, I believe. And I would like to briefly discuss how fieldwork and anthropology of health can provide a useful framework for considering the tensions involved in how social scientists build their research objects. Although a research topic in medical or public health does not by itself pose a threat to the social researcher, there are important ethical and epistemological issues that arise. Power relations between researcher and healthcare professionals can influence the scope of the research. The practices that the researchers may or may not have access to. Building the research object is obviously more than just a mental operation. More than just a mental operation. It is a process rooted in social dynamics that are influenced by power relations. We can also mention the issue of gaps and mismatches between the researcher's theoretical and methodological approach and the standards of scientific rigor from the perspective of healthcare professionals. This can lead to misunderstandings and sometimes even criticism, especially when social actors are used to experimental or only quantitative methods, when they are confronted for the first time with qualitative approaches. As Olivier de Sardan, the anthropologist, said, when social researchers investigate a medical practice, they must consider not only the target populations, let's say the patients, but also the medical and institutional actors involved. These actors, physicians, nurses, health institutions, thus become part of the research object. And however, this can create tensions. Health professionals may be uncomfortable with the idea of becoming research subjects themselves. A central challenge in collaboration or partnership is for the researcher to maintain autonomy in problematizing the research object. This means integrating health professionals' questions into the research problem without letting the latter be entirely defined by the categories professionals use to frame their clinical and professional reality. As the anthropologist Sylvie Farzan said, affinity does not mean identity. And each discipline, she thought about anthropology, but I believe it is also the case for social psychology. Affinity does not mean identity, and each discipline, with its own identity, must ask distinct questions with its own tools and a specific finality. I will be brief on this part, just saying that if we do not take part in this conceptualization work, some risks may arise associated with what? With internalizing medical categories in the theoretical construction of the object, producing knowledge that legitimize unexamined assumptions about health, illness, social groups, emphasizing individual responsibility, reinforcing the stigmatization of groups. And another issue would be the way to reinforce a reductive view of the relationship with illness. And I would like to briefly present you an empirical study within which I believe we can see how our research object is previously framed, labeled, and segmented, right? Which impose us to do this reconceptualization work in order to properly apply the lens of social presentation theory in phenomena related to illness. So, the case study. We are talking about a controversy which relies on a conflict between doctors in the field over the name in the field of endocrinology, over the naming and communication of a rare disease. In 2022, the World Health Organization approved a major reclassification of a rare disease, an endocrine disease. A key argument for this change was the semantic load of banning. Using this term, according to some physicians, might underestimate the severity of the disease. A disease that is nevertheless associated with serious consequences, disabling symptoms, and long-term quality of life impact. But opponents of this reclassification argue that tumor may provoke unnecessary anxiety due to its common connotations: cancerous, serious, life-threatening. Recent recommendations suggest that patients' opinions should be gathered before any future changes in nomenclature. If you are not familiar, as it was my case, to this disease, just let's say some common features. We are talking about a rare disease that takes usually 3 years to be diagnosed after the first symptoms. The persons who have the disease do not know what the disease they have, and they live within this situation for more or less 3 years. And we are talking about a disease that causes hormonal dysregulation that may deeply alter patients' quality of life. I'm just seeing that it's already 10:30, and I will do some major changes in my presentation in order to have an exchange with you. Otherwise, I don't see the point. So, what can I do? The reconceptualization work I did led us to identifying a medical reductionism. What I intend by medical reductionism is how the problem was framed by health authorities and healthcare professionals when we got in touch with this controversy. Examining a rare disease diagnosis beyond disclosure and doctor-patient interactions was our aim to properly apply the lens of social representation theory on this controversy. And let's say that with theoretical supports from sociology and anthropology, as well as with our data analysis, we developed 2 lines of work. The way diagnostic work is a social process taking place before the disclosure of the disease. Another line of work, which is the way how a rare disease lacking presence in public discourse and collective awareness may be associated with challenges for its familiarization. Yes, I will pass on this, but I would be pleased to get in more details with you if you want to. And let's go to the last slide. I believe that in our presentations, we try to address maybe common and transversal issues within the field of social representations. With the presentation of Raquel, how our attempt to study social representations may lead us to grasp its complexity, its dynamics, which lead to some theoretical and methodological operations. And Raquel, for example, just saw how putting in dialogue results deriving from different studies might help us to grasp the complexity of social representations phenomena. And what I intended to do was to show the influence of scientific and medical norms on the construction of research objects. Put it differently, there is no an object of social representation existing somewhere, just waiting for the researcher to be grasped, and there are some epistemological issues that I try to emphasize and illustrate. And we hope that these concerns might connect with your own work, your own interrogations. And even though it's already the time for the coffee, let's say that we take 10 minutes, so we still have 20 minutes to relax. Let's say that we take 10 minutes of questions, if you have some questions, and that's it.
Okay, I will break the ice. Don't be shy. I know no one is shy in the room, so don't be shy. No, just more a comment than a question. Of course, probably the studies. I think it's interesting to see. Actually, we have been listening to very different topics, apparently. No? Environmental degradation and health issue. But still, in my vision, what I find interesting is the reflection that connects theory and method. On the one hand, we have a vision of norm and how environmental transformation oblige us to rethink or to re-enter into the public debate. And how the label that we use affects actually the debate. Here we have a totally different methodology. Fortunately, for this slide, maybe we're too much. But in an ethnographic, situated, participatory research that was being conducted. So different methodology, but still, again, in my opinion, the issue of the label, and how, as a researcher, we accept the label as a given, or we are also interested to understand whether that specific label, subversione marine or medical etiquette, medical
categories.
Sorry, I'm mixing. Medical categories, are we accepting them and what it implies? Some of you now, looking at the two colleagues from Romania, are also working on health addiction issue, and there the label is crucial, and other colleagues here are working on different topics in which how we define the problem from the very beginning is at stake. So I think it's interesting. Both the research we have interest in understanding how the public is using, categorizing a problem, what it implies, but also how we as researchers in the field are categorizing the same problem and how it affects research that we are doing and eventually also the transformation of the practice, like also in
Merci Mauro for cette, for this comment. Actually, we were discussing with Thibaud before the presentation. Actually, this is where our role as social psychologists, and I'm saying this, but I know some of you are not social psychologists. Never mind. We are those annoying people in the interdisciplinary groups who are always asking a question, but what is your power relation with the public? Very often I find myself in this kind of situation where you have a scientist that wants to teach the public something, and our role is very often to deconstruct these places of power that are pre-established, and sometimes if we too naively go and embark on this thing, we're not doing very much good to the theory and we're not going beyond. So this is what you as PhD researchers really take this opportunity to ask this kind of undo what is presented to you. If you have you have been funded by X, why don't you redefine and come back 3 steps behind to ask what are we doing together?
Is there any question?
Maybe they want to.
Maybe everybody wants a cup of coffee, which is understandable. And just 2 informations before we all go to take a needed coffee. For the persons who present at the session of 11, if they can come here to put their PowerPoint, so it's done and it will be easy. And we will eat at 1 p.m. right after the presentation of this morning, so we can live together. It's very close, but they are expecting us after the presentation of this morning. Thank you.